Picture this. You cut off all contact, no texts, no calls, no checking her stories. You assume she'll begin to miss you, that she'll feel the emptiness. But then, nothing happens. She keeps going out, keeps laughing, keeps living as if you never existed. That feeling, it strikes at the very heart of our pride. We ask ourselves, am I truly this invisible? No, you are not invisible, but your silence is misguided. And today, we'll speak of that, not through tricks or tactics, but through self-mastery and Stoic thought. This is not merely a strategy, it is a way of life. And if you grasp it rightly, you'll reclaim more than just your place. You'll reclaim yourself. 1. Silence is only powerful when it comes from detachment, not expectation. In emotionally turbulent moments, especially after a breakup, a fight, or the sting of abandonment, many people choose silence as a defense. They stop texting, stop calling, stop interacting. Outwardly, it may appear decisive, but inwardly, many remain entangled in expectation. They are silent, but their minds are not. They still wait for a sign, a message, a gesture from the other person, and that very expectation renders their silence weak, even counterproductive. Stoic philosophy holds no regard for outward gestures that lack true inner discipline. In the thinking of Stoic philosophers like Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, what matters is not what you do, but why you do it. Silence born of pain, waiting, or a desire for attention is not detachment. It is merely dependency in disguise. It doesn't restore control. It prolongs the state of being ruled by someone else's response. By contrast, silence rooted in emotional detachment, when you truly expect nothing from the other person, is when your inner power begins to return. Detachment does not mean becoming cold, numb, or emotionally indifferent. It means accepting what has happened, no longer trying to change or manipulate the outcome, and refusing to place your happiness in someone else's hands. We might imagine detachment as letting go of a tightly pulled rope. As long as you grip your end, you remain tied to the other. Despite the silence, you are still affected by their every action or inaction. But once you release your grip, you are no longer under their influence. You stop reacting. Your mind becomes independent, your inner world calm. This explains why many believe that silence will make the other person realize something or feel your absence. But if your silence is laced with longing for a response, it doesn't project strength. It emits desperation. People can sense this, whether or not a word is spoken. Silence rooted in waiting often carries tension, anxiety, and fragility. It lets the other person feel they still hold power, because you're still waiting for them to speak. On the other hand, silence born of full detachment possesses a quiet but unmistakable force. It speaks without needing words. It seeks no validation, awaits no particular outcome, and for that reason, it causes the other person to stop and wonder, what has truly changed? From a psychological perspective, when someone withdraws all emotional energy from a relationship, the other person feels the absence, not because you engineered it, but because you stopped supplying emotional fuel. There is no more clinging, no waiting, no longing. Instead, there's a neutral emptiness that holds immense power. This silence does not exert pressure, yet it elevates your worth, because it shows you no longer need them to feel whole. In Stoicism, emotional control is not suppression or denial. It is the clarity to understand your feelings, to accept their presence, but not let them command your behavior. When you choose silence, not to manipulate, but to protect your peace, you are living that principle. And once you free yourself from the expectations and needs of others, contact or no contact, You retain self-governance, the Stoics' definition of true happiness. In the end, silence only becomes powerful when it stems from a steady mind, no longer tethered to dependence on others. When you are no longer silent to be noticed, but silent because you no longer need to be, then you have reclaimed the full power that was always yours. 2. You cannot influence what you've never impacted. In any relationship, romantic, social, or professional, the weight of silence depends on the depth of the impact you've made beforehand. If someone has never left a mark on another's mind, their absence is unlikely to be noticed, let alone felt deeply. This is a simple truth, often overlooked by those who wield silence as a strategy to regain power. Influence doesn't come from what you say, but from how you are, how others feel in your presence. In Stoic terms, this means living in accordance with your inner values, acting with intention, and responding from self-mastery rather than fleeting emotion. A person who lives this way, with depth, steadiness, and integrity, leaves a lasting impression. Their presence brings calm, provokes thought, or inspires action. And so, when they withdraw, the void is palpable. On the other hand, if your presence was merely physical, without genuine connection or distinct value, then your silence won't stir absence. It's like turning off background noise. No one notices because it never stood out. This is not judgment, but a reminder of the role your personal energy plays in shaping how others perceive your worth. Women, and anyone with high emotional intelligence, are deeply attuned to the energy you emit. If, before you vanished, you were never truly present, never created meaningful moments, never embodied personal strength, or offered genuine companionship, then there is nothing for them to miss, no memory to cherish, no contrast to reflect upon, no question to ask. Stoicism teaches that worth lies not in external validation, but in living true to what you believe is right. Yet in human relationships, living with value is how we leave an imprint. You don't need to try to impress. Live sincerely, never in pretense, act with intention, and resist the pull of impulsive emotions, and you will naturally emanate a presence that others remember. When you fall silent, after having lived this way, others don't just remember you, they feel the absence, not because you said something grand or did something dramatic, but because you stood as someone with inner clarity, inherent worth, and no dependence. This leaves a deeper impression than in performance. And when silence comes from such a person, it's not mere disappearance. It becomes an unspoken question that lingers in the mind. Conversely, if you've presented yourself as predictable, always chasing, always readily available, you've unwittingly diminished your own value. When you are constantly present, always quick to respond, perpetually yielding for recognition, you lose the allure of selectiveness. You are no longer seen as someone who lives by a personal code, but as someone who merely orbits others' expectations. And so, when you choose silence, it doesn't shift their perception. They don't register it as loss, because you never laid the groundwork for anything to be lost. Without influence, there is no impact. Silence is just a void without meaning. In the end, before you think of using silence as a tool to change the dynamic, ask yourself, have I lived deeply enough to make an impact? If not, then silence isn't the starting point. Living with value, identity, and authentic influence is. Only then will your silence carry the weight of presence, something others cannot ignore. 3. Silence is a training ground, not a waiting room. When someone chooses silence after being hurt, after a breakup, or rupture in a relationship, they often slip into a state of passive waiting. They pause communication, hoping the other person will notice the absence and choose to return. During that time, They don't truly live. They repeat a cycle of waiting, watching, and hoping. Their mind remains tethered to the other, and life becomes a string of delays, waiting for a message, a sign, a seen notification to justify another thread of hope. In such cases, silence becomes an emotional waiting room, a place where everything is put on hold, but nothing is truly released. They do not move forward, do not grow, do not change. They merely stand still, hoping that silence alone will prompt the other to feel something and come back. Yet Stoic philosophy teaches that this kind of passivity is a quiet erosion of personal value. For if we do not govern our own mind in silence, we remain led, not by words but by unspoken longing. In Stoicism, silence is not a tactic, but a season of practice, a return to the self, a time for inner observation and self-discipline. It is a training ground, not a waiting room. The absence of the other's voice must be seized as an opportunity to reclaim your inner code, to re-establish your standards, and to cultivate inner order. The Stoic does not view silence as retreat, but as a deliberate pause, one that prepares the ground for deeper advancement. It is time to read, to train the body, to expand the mind, and most of all, to face your emotions directly, not to deny them, nor indulge them. When one stops to observe the pain, they learn not to be ruled by it, and from that, they rise with sharper clarity. In a true training ground, every action taken in silence serves a purpose, whether it is physical training, learning new skills, meditation, or simply recalibrating life's rhythm. Each serves personal growth. Whether the other returns or not is no longer central. The goal has shifted. It's no longer about reclaiming attention. It's about reclaiming yourself. This shift is the foundation of inner strength. When silence becomes a means of restoration, cognitive restructuring, and willpower training, it ceases to be a void. It becomes a phase of depth, of progress, and of tangible result. And when you emerge from it, you are no longer who you were. You carry a new composure, new steadiness, and a peace no longer contingent on people or circumstance. In this context, balance not only demands attention, it renders you immune to manipulation. Because you no longer live in anticipation, you live in creation. When your energy turns from passive to active, your presence becomes naturally compelling, not because you are trying to be noticed, but because you have changed. The other person may sense the shift, not through messages, not through indirect gestures, but through the presence of your intentional absence. They won't just ask, "Why are you silent?" They'll begin to wonder, "Who are you becoming?" In the end, silence only holds power when it's not wasted on passive waiting. If you treat it as a period of discipline, refinement, and internal restructuring, you regain not only initiative, but build the enduring foundation to move forward, with or without them. And this is what Stoicism considers essential: self-command, purposeful action, and liberation from external control. 4. They won't remember the silence. They'll remember who you became. In any relationship, absence is often used as a psychological tactic. Yet what's commonly misunderstood is the belief that silence alone is enough to evoke loss, regret, or doubt. In truth, silence is merely a means. The lasting impact lies not in the silence itself, but in the person you become during it. In the Stoic spirit, personal worth doesn't come from how others perceive us, but from how we see and build ourselves. If in silence you remain the same, behaving the same, thinking the same, living without direction, then no matter how long you disappear, that silence won't leave a meaningful mark. They won't remember you because there's nothing new to remember. They won't feel your absence because there's no difference to be sensed. On the other hand, if silence becomes a time to rebuild the inner self, train the mind, reshape your life, and grow a new strength, you begin to exert a subtle yet undeniable influence, not because you want to be noticed, but because real growth always leaves a trace. Others may not know the details of your journey, but they'll feel the shift in your presence, in your energy, or even in your absence. Through this transformation, you're not trying to send a message. You simply live by a higher standard, move at a deeper rhythm, and walk a path of clarity. These changes don't need to be broadcast. They may show in a calm gaze, in your resistance to emotional impulses, or in how you spend your time on yourself rather than watching others. Stoicism teaches that a person is truly free only when they no longer depend on desires, emotions, or external validation. When you reach this state in silence, you no longer live to be remembered. You live to refine yourself, and that, paradoxically, is why others begin to think of you, not because you made them, but because you've become unforgettable. There's a common psychological paradox. Those who seek attention are often easily forgotten, but those who withdraw with steadiness, depth, and no need for notice often provoke the most curiosity. This doesn't come from strategy, but from true inner growth. And this is how personal evolution creates resonance, not through presence, but through the clear contrast between who you are and who you once were. The other person may not know exactly what changed, but they'll sense that you're no longer the same. Perhaps you're no longer predictable, no longer reactive, no longer needing their approval. And that shift alone makes them wonder, what caused this transformation? While silence is merely a pause, transformation is a declaration. And that declaration needs no words. It's expressed through a renewed essence, through your actions, emotional steadiness, clarity of life, and initiative in every moment. In the end, what others remember after time has passed isn't how long you were silent, but who you became in that silence. If your silence was meant to provoke attention, you gave away your power. But if your silence was used to rebuild yourself, you reclaimed that power and became irreplaceable in the minds of those who once knew you. And this is the core of Stoic thought. Live by inner standards and let your values speak in your stead. 5. Do not break the silence out of weakness. To remain silent is difficult, but to maintain dignity within that silence is even harder. Many choose to cut off contact as a way to reclaim control after a relationship breaks down. However, after a few days or weeks, restlessness and unease set in. Unable to bear the void, they break the silence, not with strength, but with weakness. And often, this leads to an outcome worse than where things began. When someone breaks the silence with a feeble message, a hopeful check-in, or an act meant to recapture attention, they not only abandon their original stance, but also inadvertently expose their inner instability. The other person, whoever they may be, will sense it clearly. In communication, it's not only words that convey meaning. How you show up, how often you speak, your tone, your timing, each reveals where you stand in the emotional balance of power. In Stoic thought, a person is only truly strong when they do not let fleeting emotions dictate their actions. To feel sadness, loneliness, or the yearning for connection is entirely human, but what matters is whether you act on those emotions. When you break the silence merely because you cannot withstand the waiting, you are acting from a place of fragility, and that weakness, no matter how neutral your words may sound, cannot be concealed. This not only diminishes your allure, but also weakens the weight of your words moving forward. Every time you break the silence in this way, you send a clear message. You're still dependent, still waiting, still unable to let go. The other person, if they are at all perceptive, will either continue to keep their distance or, worse, begin to dismiss your emotions entirely. One of Stoicism's core principles is to control what is within our grasp and release what is not. Whether the other responds or returns, that lies beyond your control. But whether you hold the silence or break it, that remains entirely in your hands. And that control is the true measure of strength. To hold silence does not mean to suppress or deny your emotions. It means to observe them, allow them to exist, but not obey them. The Stoic understands that the most fragile moments are often the most decisive. A single action taken without restraint in such a moment can unravel everything you've worked to build. Like a martial artist losing balance from one misstep after years of training. At times, the other may intentionally send mixed signals, test your reaction, or keep you suspended in emotional ambiguity. In such moments, your unwitting silence is how you show you've truly detached. You are no longer under their influence. You stand on the ground of self-mastery, not just in behavior, but in the quiet governance of your inner world. In the end, if you choose silence as part of a path toward maturity, then guard it with resolve. Do not break it just because of a momentary lapse in strength, for silence holds no inherent value with you. It only gains power when sustained by an unshaken core, immune to passing emotions. One poorly timed message can dismantle the self-respect you've fought to build. And in the eyes of the other, it will not merely be a text. It will be confirmation that you have not yet freed yourself from emotional dependency. 6. Become the one who rewrites the narrative. In every relationship, whether romantic or social, there exists an unspoken narrative frame. The internal story each person tells themselves about their role and the role of the other. This frame is not always spoken aloud, but it reveals itself through behavior, attitudes, and reactions between the two parties. When one person withdraws without clarity or purpose, the narrative is often shaped by the one who remains, framed in a way that flatters their ego. For instance, if you go silent after a conflict, but show no clear change in demeanor or way of living, the other person may assume you're sulking, playing games, or waiting for a reaction. They continue to hold the dominant role, the one in control, the one who gets to interpret the story to suit their pride. In their eyes, you're simply enacting a weak strategy to gain attention. And in that view, you become the one who waits, while they remain the one who decides. Stoic philosophy reminds us that while we cannot control what others think, we can control our actions, our posture, and our way of life, elements that will ultimately shape how others come to see us over time. When you change how you behave, shift your energy, and anchor yourself in calm silence, you begin doing something powerful, rewriting the narrative. Rewriting the narrative doesn't mean explaining, justifying, or trying to reshape their perception directly. It means acting in a completely new way, no longer driven by expectation, no longer chasing validation, and no longer led by emotion. When you return, or even when they observe you from afar, they begin to realize this is no longer the person they thought they knew. This shift isn't expressed through language, but through demeanor and energy. You no longer interact passively, no longer react impulsively, no longer seek recognition. Instead, you show up with steadiness, calm, and autonomy. That very presence forces them to revise the story in their mind. You are no longer the one left behind, but someone who walked away with intention and now lives by a higher standard. One of Stoicism's key principles is not allowing the external world to define who you are. When you let others assign your role, you surrender your power. Rewriting the narrative means taking that power back, not with words, but through firm action and internal consistency. Moreover, by rewriting the narrative through self-development, mentally, physically, and emotionally, you create a new model of yourself. Whether the other person recognizes it or not is irrelevant. What matters is that you are no longer trapped in the old story. You no longer need their confirmation to prove that you've changed. You live by your own standards, and that alone reshapes the dynamic if they ever return. A new narrative not only makes you more compelling, it places you in the position of authorship. From being the one observed, you become the one unreadable. From being judged, you become the one who defines value. And in doing so, you no longer rely on their response or attitude to know who you are. In the end, rewriting the narrative isn't psychological warfare or a tactic of manipulation. It is the result of sincere inner work, where you stop living by the expectations of others and begin living as an independent, self-directed, and grounded individual. From that place, every action, even your silence, carries weight, and anyone who wishes to remain in your story must now re-examine the role they play. 7. Intentional detachment is the only path to inner freedom. Inner freedom is one of the highest aims in Stoic philosophy. It is not the absence of emotion or indifference, but the ability to remain inwardly steady despite external fluctuations. One of the most effective means to achieve this state is intentional detachment, a conscious act born of clarity, not avoidance or denial. Detachment, in the Stoic sense, does not mean rejecting emotion or denying what once held meaning. It is a philosophical stance that reflects the ability to see things as they truly are, without distortion from personal attachment or unfulfilled expectation. When a person deliberately withdraws emotional energy from a relationship or situation, they are practicing control, not over the other, but over themselves. In practice, many believe they have detached simply because they no longer communicate or engage. But if internally they are still hoping, still waiting, still emotionally swayed by the other's actions or silence, then detachment has not yet occurred. That is passive silence, and such silence cannot bring inner freedom, for the mind still resides outside the self. True detachment is an inner process of depth. It begins when one chooses to release expectation, accept reality as it is, and stop seeking validation from others to feel whole. In this state, there is no need to control the narrative, no desire to wait for change or reply. The focus returns inward, and energy is directed to what one truly controls: mindset, attitude, and penal action. Stoicism teaches that people are not harmed by events, but by how they interpret those events. When a person no longer allows others' behavior to define their worth, they begin to liberate themselves from resentment, disappointment, and helplessness. Intentional detachment does not suppress emotion. It establishes a boundary between what we must master and what we must let go. When practicing such detachment, one no longer reacts impulsively. There is no need to post cryptic status updates, no probing messages, no waiting for signs to feel validated. The mind is no longer ruled by what others do or don't do, and that is where true inner freedom is born. Deep, enduring, and unshakable. A crucial aspect of intentional detachment is recognizing your motive. You must ask yourself, is my silence rooted in a need to prove worth or regain control? Or is it because I have become whole and no longer require validation? The answer determines whether your detachment leads to freedom or yet another form of dependence. What's striking is that when someone truly detaches, they stop caring whether the other returns, not from coldness, but from understanding that happiness does not come from outside. Peace comes from living aligned with your inner values, beyond the emotional influence of others. In the end, there is no path to inner freedom but through intentional detachment, not avoidance, not silence in waiting, but a decisive act, refusing to place your mind in another's hands. Only when you no longer need someone's response to feel whole are you truly free from inner conflict. And it's then that peace is no longer something you chase. It becomes what you are. 8. Silence does not create the void. Inner strength creates the echo. In many moments of breakdown or emotional crises, people often choose silence as a way to make an even flight. Absence becomes a form of expression or a strategy to make the other person feel the void and reconsider the value of the one who withdrew. But in truth, silence alone cannot create a meaningful absence unless the other has previously felt depth and strength in the one who is now gone. A void only exists where a valuable presence once was, and the echo, the internal reaction, the reflection, the shift in perception does not come from silence itself, but from the strength the other perceives in that silence. If before you disappeared, you had not demonstrated self-mastery, personal worth, or a meaningful presence, then your withdrawal will be seen as a weak reaction, or simply an unremarkable silence. Stoicism does not esteem action without clear purpose and inward growth. In this context, silence only holds power if it is paired with transformation. It means you are not merely disappearing, but evolving quietly into a deeper, more grounded version of yourself, no longer dependent on external validation. It is this transformation that creates the true echo, not outwardly, but in the other person's perception. The echo does not arise from how long you've been gone. It comes from the realization of who you've become. This change doesn't need to be declared or shown off. It's felt through the energy you project, the way you are present or no longer present, and especially through how you respond or no longer react to the things that once hurt you. Someone who has truly changed is no longer pulled into old emotional cycles. They do not use silence to wait, to punish, or to manipulate. They choose silence because they've learned that not everything deserves a response. Their calm does not come from suppression, but from the realization that inner peace matters more than any conversation not born of maturity. In this case, silence becomes a foundation, a space where your character, values, and inner depth grow stronger. You no longer react the same way, no longer seek attention, and no longer feel the need to explain yourself. All of this creates a clear shift. And it is this shift that makes the other begin to feel a real absence. From a psychological perspective, people tend to devalue what is predictable, too familiar, or always available. When someone who once acted this way becomes quiet, composed, and no longer easily accessible, the other person's perception begins to shift. No more dependency, no more reaction, no more need to show up to be noticed. All of this forms a kind of quiet yet powerful echo. This is not an echo caused by a single action, but the result of inner strength built in silence. And this is what Stoicism emphasizes. Inner power does not need to be displayed to have impact. It reveals itself through your demeanor, your composure, and your independence from external circumstance. In the end, without true inner development, silence is just an empty space. But when rooted in strength and genuine internal change, silence becomes an unspoken declaration, one that cannot be ignored, that forces a relationship to be redefined, and that transforms you into someone no longer easily reached. 9. Not reacting is a strength, not indifference. In today's world, where rapid responses are seen as a sign of care, choosing not to react is often misunderstood as apathy. coldness, or even irresponsibility. However, in Stoic philosophy, the decision not to react to external stimuli, especially emotional ones, is an expression of inner strength, not disregard or contempt. Unlike ignoring someone out of disinterest, non-reaction in Stoicism is a deliberate choice. It stems from self-control, one of the core tenets emphasized by every Stoic thinker. Epictetus once said, "It's not things that disturb us, but our judgments about them." Therefore, non-reaction does not mean we are unaware. It means we are conscious enough not to let events pull us out of our inner equilibrium. In human relationships, emotional reactions are instinctive. A sharp word, a hurtful action, or a calculated silence can all trigger an urge to respond immediately. But in Stoicism, such reaction is seen as surrender, giving away your agency and allowing others to steer your behavior. Every time you react from emotion, you hand someone else control over your actions, often without realizing it. Choosing not to react immediately is not avoidance, nor is it weakness. On the contrary, it requires deep awareness and disciplined restraint. When someone does something that unsettles you, instead of retaliating or resisting, the Stoic pauses and asks, "Is this within my control? Will this reaction serve my peace and my principles?" If the answer is no, then the refusal to react is not only wise, it is essential for protecting your inner integrity. What matters here is intent. In non-reaction, you are not withdrawing your presence. You are still attentive, still observant, still fully aware of what is happening. But you choose not to be pulled into an exchange that you know will damage your mental state. You don't react, not because you don't care, but because you care about something greater: your stability, your autonomy, and your inner depth. The difference between not reacting and ignoring lies in the quality of awareness. Ignoring is often a form of avoidance or indifference. It lacks intention and stems from disengagement. Non-reaction, however, is the product of reflection, choice, and self-mastery. It is a conscious act, not driven by retaliation or temporary emotion. Moreover, non-reaction produces a powerful psychological effect. When someone expects you to react and you don't, they are forced to pause and reassess. Your stillness becomes a mirror, reflecting their behavior back at them. In many cases, this is more impactful than any words or actions, as it creates space for them to confront themselves without the distraction of your response to deflect or blame. Stoicism does not teach emotional numbness. It teaches discernment, knowing what deserves action and what does not. Non-reaction is not emotional suppression. It is behavioral refinement, choosing actions aligned with long-term virtue rather than short-term impulse. In this sense, balance is not absence. It is the full presence of mindful restraint. In the end, non-reaction is a purposeful act that reveals maturity and inner strength. It shows that you are no longer controlled by outside forces, no longer caught in cycles of unnecessary stress and reactivity. In a noisy, reactive world, the quiet power of calm non-reaction may be the clearest and most commanding voice of all. 10. No one can take your worth unless you surrender it. One of the core principles in Stoic philosophy is that true value does not come from external things like reputation, recognition, or relationships, but from how a person lives in alignment with their inner principles and maintains their dignity regardless of circumstance. Therefore, no one can take your worth from you unless you choose to abandon it yourself. In relationships, especially when facing rejection, distance, or silence, people often fall into a sense of being discarded, diminished, or worthless. Yet this feeling only arises When one attaches their self-worth to being loved, noticed, or validated by another, when that attention disappears, they immediately feel less valuable, when in truth, their essence remains unchanged, no matter who walks away or stops paying attention. Stoicism teaches that the only thing we truly own is our ability to choose our response to life. One may lose social standing, affection, or opportunity, but no one can take their dignity, self-respect, integrity, or intrinsic value unless they willingly give it up. This means losing someone is not the same as losing yourself, unless you believe your worth depends on them. In reality, people often confuse being rejected with being worthless, but rejection is not a judgment of character. It is a choice made by the other, and that choice does not define who you are. If your response to rejection is to abandon your dignity, to beg, or to change yourself just to be accepted, then your worth wasn't taken. It was surrendered. The Stoic does not let emotion dictate personal value. They may feel sadness, pain, or disappointment, but they do not abandon their moral standards or inner steadiness because of it. Wounds, if they exist, are temporary. Personal worth is preserved through intentional action, self-governed response, and a steadfast commitment to one's own values. Protecting your worth is not pride or stubbornness. It is the result of knowing who you are, why you live as you do, and understanding that you need no one else to affirm it. When you stop seeking value externally, you become more resilient in the face of relationship upheaval. That resilience makes you less susceptible to manipulation and less likely to spiral when attention is withdrawn. In moments of abandonment or neglect, the Stoic does not blame, justify, or prove. Instead, they return to themselves, reflect on their conduct, and if they find it aligned with their principles, they hold steady because they know consistency in character is the foundation of value, not another's reaction. In the end, no one can take your worth because it was never in their hands to begin with. It lies in how you think, act, and treat yourself. Wounds only enter when you confuse external validation with internal value. Once you separate the two, you not only preserve your self-respect, you step into a freedom where you no longer need to be held on to know that you are worthy. We've all been there, using silence as a form of resistance to draw attention, or simply because there's nothing left to say. I've personally been trapped in that cycle, staying silent in the hope that the other person would feel the absence and come back. But the longer I waited, the more I realized that silence wasn't coming from strength. It was coming from an unhealed wound. Only when I stopped using silence as a way to affect someone else and started using it as a space to train myself did everything begin to change. I started journaling, exercising regularly, limiting social media, and spending meaningful time with people who truly mattered. No more checking up on them. No more subtle messages. Just me, rebuilding the version of myself from the ground up. And I realized something. When you no longer need someone else to affirm your worth, that's when you start living freely. Silence is no longer an empty space. It becomes time for recovery, for upgrading, for rediscovering the strength that was once lost. Every small action, from how you eat, how you train, to how you stand tall, becomes a reflection of someone maturing in silence. So if you're being silent, ask yourself, am I still waiting for something? Or am I preparing to become someone who no longer needs to wait? If this video resonated with something deep inside you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss future content. Because in the end, we don't need anyone to affirm our worth. The strength in our silence will speak loudest of the person we are becoming. See you in the next video.